If you're enjoying stories filled with betrayal, shocking twists, and emotional justice, don't forget to subscribe. Every story here is inspired by the moments that change people's lives forever. Now let me tell you about the night my marriage truly ended, because it wasn't the night I found out she was cheating. It was the night she walked through the front door expecting me to scream. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. I heard her car pull into the driveway. The engine idled for a few seconds before shutting off, just like it always did whenever she came home late. She was probably rehearsing another excuse. Another story. Another lie she expected me to swallow. A few moments later, the front door unlocked. She stepped inside without looking at me. "I know," she sighed, dropping her purse onto the couch. "You're going to start another interrogation." Her voice carried that familiar mix of irritation and confidence. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was the voice of someone who believed they had complete control. I was working late. My phone died. "Can we not do this again?" Normally, that's exactly what would have happened. I would have asked where she'd been. She would have rolled her eyes. I'd point out another inconsistency. She'd accuse me of being insecure. Then we'd spend hours shouting until one of us finally gave up. That had become our marriage. But not tonight. Tonight. I didn't say a single word. She frowned. For the first time in weeks, she actually looked at me instead of walking straight upstairs. I was sitting alone in the living room. No television. No music. Just silence. I rested both hands on my knees and watched her with an expression she couldn't read. "Seriously?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You're not going to say anything?" I slowly stood up. She took a small step backward. Not because she thought I'd hurt her. Because something felt wrong. People expect anger. People know how to fight anger. Silence? Silence terrifies them. "I don't have any questions tonight," I finally said. She blinked. "What?" "I already have my answers." Her confidence cracked for the first time. "What are you talking about?" I didn't respond. Instead, I quietly lifted my hand and pointed toward the wall behind her. "Just look." She turned. There, hanging neatly above the fireplace, was a framed photograph. It hadn't been there that morning. She stared at it without reacting. For 1 second. Then 2. Then everything changed. The color drained from her face. Her breathing stopped. The keys slipped from her fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic clang that echoed through the room. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She simply stared at that picture as if she'd seen a ghost. "No," she whispered. Her voice barely existed. "No, that's impossible." For the first time since all of this began. She looked afraid. Not nervous. Not defensive. Afraid. I watched every emotion cross her face: confusion, disbelief, panic. Then back at the photograph again. "Where?" she asked, struggling to breathe. "Where did you get that?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the picture wasn't the real surprise. The real surprise was what it proved. And she still had no idea just how much I already knew. She thought the worst thing that could happen was me discovering her affair. She was wrong. Because that photograph wasn't just exposing one lie. It was about to destroy every lie she'd been living. And she would soon realize that the man she'd spent weeks deceiving had quietly been uncovering the truth all along. The look on her face that night didn't happen overnight. It was built over months. Months of lies. Months of doubt. Months of convincing myself that love was enough to fix what was quietly falling apart. Looking back now, I can see exactly where everything started. The scary part. At the time, none of it seemed big enough to destroy a marriage. It was always something small. Something easy to explain. Or at least, easy enough that I wanted to believe her. About 6 months before that night, she started working late more often. At first, I didn't question it. Her company had landed a new client, and she seemed genuinely excited. Just a few busy weeks, she'd tell me while grabbing her laptop bag. "I'll make it up to you this weekend." I smiled every time. "Don't worry. I understand." Because that's what husbands do. We trust. Or at least we're supposed to. But those few busy weeks somehow turned into every week. Then weekends became team dinners. Business trips started appearing out of nowhere. Her phone was suddenly glued to her hand. And every conversation felt rehearsed. One evening, we were eating dinner together when her phone buzzed. She grabbed it so quickly that her fork hit the plate. I laughed. "Expecting an important call?" She forced a smile. "Just work." 5 seconds later, she stood up. "I need some air." She walked outside just to answer a text. That was the first time my stomach tightened. Not because of the message itself. But because she'd never hidden anything from me before. At least, not that I knew. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself I was overthinking. But strange things kept happening. One afternoon, I was cleaning the kitchen when I found a receipt inside one of her shopping bags. It wasn't from any store near her office. It was from a small Italian restaurant almost 40 minutes away. 2 expensive dinners. 2 glasses of wine. Dessert. The date matched one of the nights she'd told me she was stuck in meetings. When she came home, I casually asked, "How was work last Thursday?" Without hesitation, she answered, "Terrible. Meetings all night." I almost mentioned the receipt. Almost. Instead, I simply nodded. Because I wanted her to tell the truth on her own. She never did. But that wasn't the worst part. About 2 weeks later, I woke up around 3 in the morning. The bed beside me was empty. I found her sitting in the backyard. She wasn't crying. She wasn't working. She was smiling. At her phone. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she nearly dropped it. "You scared me." "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Just answering emails." At 3 in the morning. Outside. In the dark. I wanted to believe that answer. I really did. But belief was becoming harder every day. Then came something I couldn't explain away. I was looking for a flashlight in the hall closet when an old gym bag fell onto the floor. Inside was another phone. Not her regular one. A completely different phone. Powered off. No case. No wallpaper. Nothing that identified it. Just a phone. The moment I picked it up, I heard the garage door opening. She was home. Without thinking, I shoved it back into the bag. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every possible explanation ran through my head. Maybe it belonged to work. Maybe it was broken. Maybe it was an old backup phone. There were 100 innocent reasons. And one guilty one. Guess which one kept me awake? The next morning, the phone was gone. So was the gym bag. I never saw either of them again. A week later, something even stranger happened. She started dressing differently. Not for me. For work. She bought expensive perfume she'd never worn before. New dresses. New heels. She spent nearly an hour getting ready every morning. One day I smiled and said, "You look amazing." Without even looking at me, she replied, "I know." That answer hurt more than she realized. Because it wasn't meant for me. I just didn't know who it was meant for. Then came the conversation that changed everything. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Collins, was watering her flowers when I walked outside to grab the mail. Oh, she smiled. I almost waved to your wife yesterday. I looked up. Yesterday? Yes. She was downtown with a nice-looking gentleman. She laughed softly. I thought maybe your haircut made you look younger. My heart stopped. What did he look like? She shrugged. Tall. Dark jacket. They seemed happy. She didn't know what she'd just done. To her, it was harmless conversation. To me, it was the first time someone else unknowingly confirmed the fear I'd been trying to bury. But even then, I didn't accuse my wife. Instead, I accused myself. Maybe Mrs. Collins had mistaken someone else. Maybe she saw the wrong person. Maybe. It's amazing how many lies we tell ourselves when the truth hurts too much. Unfortunately, my wife had become even better at telling lies. And she wasn't just convincing me anymore. She was convincing everyone around us. Whenever I questioned her, she'd sigh dramatically. You're becoming obsessed. If you trusted me, we wouldn't keep having these conversations. Then she started saying those things in front of friends. Even in front of my parents. One Sunday during dinner, my mother gently pulled me aside. Son. She hesitated. You need to stop accusing your wife. I haven't accused her of anything. Mom frowned. She says you're checking her phone, timing her, questioning everything she does. I stared at her. I've never checked her phone. Mom looked confused. She said you did. I suddenly realized something terrifying. My wife wasn't just hiding the truth. She was writing a completely different story. One where she was the victim. And I was the jealous, controlling husband. Even my younger sister called me later that week. Are you okay? What do you mean? You've been acting paranoid. That word hit me like a punch. Paranoid. The exact same word my wife kept using. She had repeated it so often. Everyone started believing it. Even the people who'd known me my entire life. I felt completely alone. Like I was slowly losing not just my marriage, but my own reality. And still, I stayed. Because I loved her. Because I kept hoping tomorrow would be different. I had no idea that tomorrow would bring something far worse than another lie. And I definitely didn't know that one forgotten discovery would eventually lead me to the mysterious photograph that made her freeze the moment she saw it. After that conversation with my mother, something inside me changed. Not because I had finally accepted the truth. Because I had finally accepted one painful fact. No matter what I said, no one was going to believe me. Every question I asked made me look guilty. Every concern I shared became another example of how controlling I supposedly was. My wife had turned my love into evidence against me. So I stopped asking questions. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to catch her in another lie. And strangely, that's when the truth started finding me. She noticed the change almost immediately. One evening she came home nearly 2 hours late, tossed her purse onto the kitchen counter, and smiled. You're quiet. I've had a long day. You're not going to ask where I've been? I looked up from my coffee. No. She studied my face. For a second, she looked almost disappointed. Then she shrugged. Good. She walked upstairs without another word. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd finally given up. She had no idea I had simply stopped playing her game. From that day forward, I became an observer. I paid attention. Not obsessively. Just carefully. I noticed patterns. She always left the house 15 minutes earlier than necessary. She never answered calls while she was home. She smiled at texts but frowned whenever I entered the room. Every Friday she claimed her department had late meetings. Every Saturday morning she suddenly needed coffee from a cafe across town. None of those things proved anything. But together, they formed a picture. A picture she couldn't see. I started writing everything down. Dates. Times. Excuses. Little contradictions. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. It's amazing how quickly lies begin collapsing once you stop arguing with them. One Wednesday afternoon, she called me from work. "I'll be home really late tonight." "Big project?" "Yeah. I'll probably eat at the office." "Okay." She hung up. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our shared credit card. Someone had paid for lunch at a beachfront restaurant nearly 40 miles away. At 1:30 in the afternoon. During her big project. I looked at the notification. Then I quietly locked my phone. No confrontation. No accusations. Just another piece of the puzzle. That evening she came home carrying a takeout container. I barely had time to eat. I smiled. "I'm sorry your day was so busy." She smiled back. "Thanks for understanding." For the first time in months. Lying to me looked easy. And that terrified me more than the lie itself. But life has a strange way of revealing secrets when you least expect them. A few days later, I decided to clean out the attic. Not because I was looking for evidence. I was honestly just tired of the clutter. Dust covered everything. Old holiday decorations. Boxes from our move. Photo albums we hadn't opened in years. As I reached for one heavy storage box, the bottom gave way. Its contents spilled across the floor. Most of it was ordinary. Old greeting cards. Receipts. Travel brochures. Then, one photograph slid across the wooden floor and stopped against my shoe. I bent down and picked it up. At first, it didn't seem important. It looked old. Faded around the edges. The kind of picture people forget exists. Then I looked closer. And my heartbeat slowed. There she was. My wife. Several years younger. Long before we were married. She stood beside a man I had never seen before. Both of them were smiling. Nothing unusual about that. Friends take pictures together all the time. But something about the image felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Not yet. I kept staring. There was a tiny detail in the background that caught my attention. So small that most people would never notice it. I almost missed it myself. The moment I saw it, everything about that photograph changed. I didn't fully understand why. Not then. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This picture mattered. Far more than my wife probably realized. I flipped it over. There was no date. No names. No message. Nothing. Just an old photograph that somehow felt heavier than everything else in that attic. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I had all the answers. Because I had finally found the question I needed to ask. But I wasn't going to ask it. Not yet. That night she came home humming to herself. She looked happier than she'd looked in months. "You seem to be in a good mood," she said. "I am." She laughed. "See? I told you things would get better if you stopped overthinking." "Everything." I nodded. "Maybe you were right." Her shoulders relaxed. That single sentence convinced her I'd surrendered. From that moment on, she became careless. She left her phone face up on tables. She stayed out even later. She stopped inventing detailed excuses because she no longer believed she needed them. Sometimes she'd simply say, "I'm going out." And I'd answer, "Okay." The less I reacted, the bolder she became. She mistook peace for weakness, silence for defeat, acceptance for ignorance. She never considered another possibility. That I wasn't looking away because I had given up. I was looking ahead. Planning. Waiting. Every lie she told gave me more time. Every careless mistake brought me one step closer to understanding the truth behind that forgotten photograph. And deep down, I had the unmistakable feeling that the man standing beside her in that old picture wasn't just someone from her past. He was the key to everything. I still didn't know exactly how. But I was about to find out. And when I finally did, nothing in our marriage would ever be the same again. The night everything finally unraveled didn't begin with a dramatic phone call. It began with a single text. Around 6 that evening, my phone vibrated. Don't wait up. We're celebrating a project milestone. I'll probably stay at Melissa's afterward. No heart emoji. No explanation. Just another carefully crafted excuse. A few months earlier, that message would have sent me into a spiral. I would have called. I would have texted. I would have driven across town trying to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Not anymore. I simply replied. Okay. Be safe. 3 words. She read them immediately. She never answered. That silence told me more than any confession ever could. But she didn't know something. Earlier that afternoon, I had already finished preparing the house. Not for a confrontation. For an ending. I cleaned every room. I washed the dishes. I vacuumed the living room. I even lit the vanilla candle she always said made the house feel warm. It almost looked like we were expecting guests. The only new thing in the room was the framed photograph hanging above the fireplace. I stood in front of it for several minutes. My reflection stared back at me through the glass. Months ago, that picture would have broken me. Now, it gave me peace. Because the truth has a strange effect. It hurts at first. Then it becomes freedom. Around midnight, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She stayed inside for almost a full minute. I could picture exactly what she was doing. Checking her makeup. Practicing her excuse. Preparing for another argument. She expected anger. She expected accusations. She expected me to make her feel guilty. She had no idea I was finished asking for honesty. The front door unlocked. She stepped inside with an exhausted sigh. I'm home. No answer. She slipped off her shoes and looked toward the living room. There I was. Exactly where she'd expected to find me. Sitting quietly in my chair. Hands folded. Completely calm. She frowned. You're still awake? I was waiting. She rolled her eyes. Of course you were. She dropped her purse onto the couch. I already know how this goes. She took a deep breath before I could speak. I was with Melissa. My phone died. We ended up talking for hours. If you don't believe me, that's your problem. I said nothing. She frowned again. Aren't you even going to ask where I was? No. That one word stopped her. No? I already know where you were. For the first time all night. She hesitated. What does that mean? Instead of answering, I slowly stood. Then I raised my hand. Not toward her. Toward the wall behind her. Look. She turned. Her eyes landed on the photograph. At first, nothing happened. Then recognition appeared. Her expression froze. The color disappeared from her face so quickly it was almost frightening. Her purse slipped from her shoulder. The sound echoed across the room. No. She whispered it so softly I almost didn't hear. No. She stepped closer to the picture. Her breathing became shallow. Her fingers trembled. "Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. She reached toward the frame but stopped herself before touching it. Like she was afraid it might burn her. The photograph had been taken years before we ever met. She looked younger. Happier. Standing beside the same man she'd been secretly meeting for months. The same man she'd insisted was just a coworker. The same man she'd built countless lies around. But that wasn't why she was terrified. Her eyes weren't focused on herself. They were locked onto the background. Specifically, one tiny detail. A detail she'd apparently never noticed. When I first found the photograph in that dusty storage box, I hadn't understood its importance either. Not until I enlarged the image. Not until I looked carefully. There, on the man's left hand, was a wedding ring. Small. Almost impossible to notice. Except once you saw it. You couldn't unsee it. And just beyond the edge of the frame, barely visible, stood another woman. Only part of her face appeared. One shoulder. A hand resting naturally against his arm. Not the posture of a stranger. The posture of someone who belonged there. Someone the photographer had accidentally cropped out. I finally spoke. "Interesting picture." She slowly turned toward me. Her eyes filled with panic. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I spent months believing this picture proved only one thing. I took a slow breath. That my wife was having an affair. I paused. But then I kept looking. Her lips parted. And I realized something. She shook her head before I even continued. "No. I don't think he ever told you he was married." A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. "I don't think he ever mentioned the woman standing beside him." Another tear followed. "I don't think you were the only person he lied to." Her shoulders collapsed. She looked back at the photograph. Then whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. He told me he'd never been married." The room fell silent. Months of suspicion. Months of deception. Months of sleepless nights. And suddenly I understood something I never expected. The affair that destroyed our marriage had been built on another betrayal. He hadn't simply lied to me. He had lied to her too. Not because she deserved sympathy. Her choices were still hers. She had still lied. Still manipulated. Still betrayed me every single day. But the fantasy she'd sacrificed our marriage for had never even been real. She covered her mouth with both hands. "I didn't know." "I believe you." She stared at me in disbelief. "You believe me?" "I believe he deceived you." I held her gaze. But don't confuse that with forgiveness. Her knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't looking at me like a jealous husband. She was looking at me like someone who already knew she had lost everything. Then she looked at the photograph one final time. "I never noticed the ring." "I know." "I never saw that woman." "I know." She closed her eyes. Everything she'd believed. Every promise she'd trusted. Every lie she'd repeated. Collapsed in a matter of seconds. She thought walking through that front door would end with another argument. Instead, one forgotten photograph had shattered every illusion she had been living. And she still didn't know the worst part. Because the picture wasn't my revenge. It was only the beginning. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. She stood frozen in front of the photograph, her shoulders shaking, her eyes fixed on the tiny wedding ring that had destroyed every illusion she'd been living under. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry anymore. The strange thing about finally reaching the truth is that it doesn't always bring satisfaction. Sometimes it simply brings peace. She slowly turned toward me. Her mascara had already begun running down her cheeks. "I swear," she whispered. "I didn't know he was married." "I know." She looked confused. "Then, why are you so calm?" I let out a slow breath. "Because I stopped fighting this battle a long time ago." She stared at me without speaking. "You thought tonight was the night I finally discovered your affair." I shook my head. "I discovered it months ago." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I just stopped trying to convince you to tell me the truth." I walked over to the coffee table. A neatly organized folder rested there. I picked it up and placed it in front of her. "Go ahead." With trembling hands, she opened it. The first page was a timeline. Dates. Times. Every late night. Every fake business dinner. Every weekend she claimed she was with friends. As she turned each page, her breathing became heavier. You kept track of all this?" "I didn't need to spy on you." I looked into her eyes. "You documented everything yourself." She frowned. "I don't understand." Every lie created another contradiction. I pointed toward one page. "You told me you were working late." I flipped to the next. Our bank statement showed dinner for two across town. Another page. "You told me your phone died." Another. "But your smartwatch still synced messages to our shared account." She covered her mouth. "I forgot." "I know." Another page. "You said you stayed at Melissa's." I slid a printed text message toward her. "The next morning Melissa asked if we wanted to have dinner together because she hadn't seen you in weeks." Her face completely collapsed. Every page was another mirror. Not one filled with accusations. Only facts. Cold. Simple. Impossible to argue with. "I never hired a private investigator," I said quietly. "I never followed you. I never hacked your phone." She looked up. "Then how?" "Because lies don't stay organized forever." Silence settled over the room again. Then something happened that I honestly wasn't expecting. She started crying. Not the dramatic crying I'd seen during previous arguments. Not tears meant to end a conversation. These were different. The kind that come when someone finally realizes they can no longer lie to themselves. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped her lips. "I know saying that means nothing." She looked at the photograph again. "I ruined everything." I didn't answer. Because she wasn't finished. "I destroyed our marriage." She paused. "For someone who never even loved me." That sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. True. She slowly sat down on the couch. "I thought he was going to leave everything for me." I closed my eyes for a moment. "He already had someone." Another tear rolled down her cheek. "And I threw away the one person who never lied to me." For the first time that night, she understood the real cost of her choices. Not because she'd been caught. Because the fantasy she'd sacrificed everything for had never existed. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. I reached into the folder one final time. "There are a few more papers." She wiped her eyes. "What papers?" I handed them to her. She glanced at the first page. Then immediately looked back at me. "No." Her voice cracked. "No. They weren't evidence. They were legal documents. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already filed. Already approved." Her hands began shaking uncontrollably. "You already?" "Yes." "When?" 3 weeks ago." She stared at me in complete disbelief. But, I thought. You thought I was still trying to save this marriage. I nodded slowly. I stopped trying the day I realized I was the only one still in it. She flipped through the remaining documents. Property transfer. Financial separation. Bank accounts. Insurance. Everything had already been arranged. One page after another. One chapter after another. An entire future. She hadn't even realized was disappearing. Our house. She looked up. What about the house? It's sold. Her lips parted. What? The closing papers were finalized yesterday. You sold our home? Our home stopped existing long before the paperwork did. She looked around the living room. The furniture. The family photographs. The familiar walls. Everything suddenly felt temporary. When do we leave? I don't. She blinked. The movers arrive tomorrow. And you? I already signed the lease on my new place. She buried her face in her hands. No. I couldn't keep living inside memories that only belonged to me. For several moments. The only sound in the room was her crying. Then she stood. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone learning how to walk again. She stepped toward me. I'll end it. I remained silent. I'll tell everyone the truth. Silence. I'll do counseling. Another step. I'll do anything. She was standing only a few feet away now. Please. Her voice completely broke. Please don't leave. Months ago. Those words would have meant everything. Months ago, I would have believed them. Months ago, I probably would have forgiven her. But months ago, I was still fighting for someone who had already walked away. Now, I was finally fighting for myself. I picked up my car keys from the table. She grabbed my wrist. Please. There wasn't anger in her voice anymore. Only desperation. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I destroyed your trust. But please. I don't want to lose you. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Then I gave her the first genuine smile I'd had in months. Not because I was happy she was suffering. Because I was finally free. I looked into her tear-filled eyes one last time. You expected me to fight for someone who had already left. I paused. But I chose to fight for the man I almost forgot. She closed her eyes. Another sob escaped her lips. I turned toward the front door. Behind me, I heard her whisper my name. Once. Then again. I didn't stop. I opened the door. Cool night air filled the room. For the first time in months, I could breathe. As I stepped outside, I heard her collapse onto the living room floor, crying harder than I had ever heard anyone cry. I didn't look back. Because some endings don't need one last glance. They only need the courage to finally walk away. And for the first time in a very long time, I did. 6 months passed. Not overnight. Not easily. Healing never happens the way people describe it. There wasn't a single morning when I woke up and suddenly felt whole again. It happened little by little. One peaceful sunrise. One quiet cup of coffee. One evening without wondering where she was. Then another. And another. Eventually, I realized something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The silence that once haunted me had become my favorite sound. I moved into a smaller house on the other side of town. It wasn't as big. It wasn't as expensive. But every room belonged to the truth. There were no secrets hiding inside those walls. No excuses waiting at the front door. No sleepless nights listening for a car that should have come home hours earlier. Just peace. Friends started noticing the difference before I did. One afternoon, my best friend smiled across the lunch table. "You know something?" "What?" "You laugh again." I paused. I hadn't even realized it. He was right. For months, I had forgotten how. My mother visited a few weeks later. She looked around my new home, then looked at me. "I haven't seen you this calm in years." Neither had I. Because surviving betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let it define the rest of your life. People often ask if I ever heard from my ex-wife again. The answer is yes. She called. She texted. She wrote long emails filled with apologies, regret, and promises that things would be different. At first, I read them. Then I stopped. Not because I hated her. Because every reply would have reopened a chapter one had finally finished. Forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to carry the anger any longer. As for the man she thought she loved, his lies eventually caught up with him too. The truth has a strange way of finding people. No matter how carefully they hide from it. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't need to. Life had already delivered the consequences neither of them expected. And me? I finally understood something that had taken me months to learn. Closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you choose. One weekend, while unpacking the last few boxes from the move, I found the same framed photograph. For a long moment, I just stood there holding it. Months earlier, that picture had represented heartbreak. Now, it represented freedom. I cleaned the glass, replaced the worn frame with a new one, and hung it on the wall of my home office. Not because I wanted to remember the betrayal, but because I never wanted to forget the lesson. Whenever I look at that photograph now, I don't see my ex-wife. I don't see the man who lied to both of us. I don't even think about the affair anymore. I see the moment my life changed. The moment I stopped begging for honesty from someone determined to deceive me. The moment I chose self-respect over false hope. People sometimes believe justice is watching the person who hurt you suffer. I used to think that too. Now I know better. Real justice is waking up one day and realizing they no longer control your happiness. Real revenge is building a life so peaceful that the pain they caused can no longer reach you. As for that picture, it never destroyed my marriage. It simply revealed that my marriage had already been broken long before I found it. The truth was always there. Hidden in plain sight. Just waiting for someone willing to look closely enough. And if there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. Never beg someone to choose you. Never sacrifice your peace to keep someone who has already walked away in their heart. The people who lie eventually expose themselves. But the people who choose self-respect eventually find something far more valuable than revenge. They find freedom. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved, then you know how hard that first step can be. But trust me. Sometimes the hardest step you ever take becomes the one that finally leads you home.